This whole thing.
Yeah, that whole thing.
Okay. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who gives the Torah of truth and the good news of salvation to his people Israel and to all the people through his Son Yeshua the Messiah, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Anya May. Alrighty, guys, let's go to Acts 23. We didn't get very far, did we? Who can summarize for me what happened up to this point? Just the last couple of things that happened.
What happened after Acts 22 and 23?
What happened in Acts 22? Scan your Bibles. Greek. Hosanna? Yes, we spoke about testimonies, that's right. Who was Paul giving his testimony or defense to? Who can remember? How many defenses are we looking into with Paul? How many? 7. The first one was in front of the crowd. Remember, we spoke about Paul being in front of the crowd. Why was he arrested? Eyeball.
Because he brought Gentiles into the temple, but they
10 points for you, sir. They weren't actually Gentiles.
And then they were the same nature as him.
Yes, and then he was standing up in front of the Sanhedrin. Well done. Okay, so Paul is currently standing in front of the Sanhedrin, and he has just been arrested, and they tried to lynch him, basically. They're trying to beat him and kill him, and then the commander came and saved him, basically. We're going to get into that commander tonight, but he came in and saved him, and then Paul was like, hey, just let me speak to these people. And then he spoke to the people, and he gave this entire defense, which is pretty much like a 3-part testimony, and standing up there, and then the crowd went wild again, and then the commander was upset again because he probably couldn't understand what Paul was saying to the crowd, because Paul was speaking in Hebrew, and the commander of the Roman army or cohort didn't actually know what he was saying. So he now wants to have Paul flogged. Paul uses what as his defense in that instance? His citizenship. Okay, and the commander takes a step back and he's like, whoa, okay, I didn't know you were a citizen. I'm not allowed to flog you, I'm not allowed to whip you, so let me just actually take it from here, and then we'll go find fault with you at the Sanhedrin. And then where we got to is Paul standing in front of Ananias. And I think we're just going to read from 23 verse 1 tonight. But we've gone through the whitewashed wall, but we'll just skim through it. So just go to Acts 23 verse 1. It says here, Shaul looked straight at them and said, brothers, I've been discharging my obligations to God with a perfectly clear conscience right up until today. But the high priest, Ananias, ordered those standing near him to strike him on the mouth. Then Shaul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. What did we say about the whitewashed wall?
It's a wall that in the inside is not so great, but on the outside it looks nice.
All right, and where does he get this whitewashed wall imagery from? Ezekiel, yes, Ezekiel 13. And in Ezekiel 13, God is speaking through Ezekiel to the people that are having false prophecies. The prophets are saying, don't worry, guys, everything's going to be peaceful, everything's going to be calm. But God's actually telling Ezekiel to tell them the exact opposite. And he's saying, Ezekiel's telling the people, guys, you've left God's law, you've gone and done your own stuff, you haven't listened to me, Babylon's coming, all the best with that, basically. And at the moment, at that point, Ezekiel referenced this whitewashed wall. And he said, you guys have built a wall without mortar, and you've just painted it over white. So you've just sort of painted over all the issues. And we got into the fact that what Paul is actually saying to the high priest at this point is that you're pretty much broken inside. Your foundation is lacking. Not only the foundation, but the entire structure is built without mortar. It's lacking something, like Tam pointed out. It's missing something. They're missing Yeshua. They're missing the key ingredient in the wall. That's Yeshua. And then we got onto that, you know, it's like taking someone's fruit that's not so great and it's looking all moldy and rotten, and just painting. Like if it's an apple and it's all moldy, we just paint it red to make it look nice. That's basically what he was saying. Your fruit is so rotten, but you've painted it over so that it looks nice. You're just addressing the symptom. The symptom is the mold. But what's the actual root cause? The root is not lacquer. Whatever you're feeding this tree is not that good. Something is not right. And we started looking at ourselves, what is our fruit? What is our root system? We got into that. That was the whitewashed wall. So something not so nice to say to someone. But I like what he said there. He said, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. And that would have immediately given Ananias the imagery of Ezekiel 13, where God was actually saying, I'm going to strike you guys. This is a whitewashed wall. So saying something's going to fall down. Will you sit there judging me according to the Torah, yet in violation of the Torah order me to be struck? The man nearby said, this is the high priest of God that you're insulting. Shaul said, I don't know, brother, that he was the high priest, for it says in the Torah, you are not to speak disparagingly of a ruler of your people. It does say that in the Torah. It does actually say you will respect God and you will respect the ruler of the land in the same sentence. And we came to the conclusion that possibly Paul here was not being sarcastic, but probably being truthful, because at that time, and we're going to see later on now, that the high priesthood changed quite often. And he was out. I mean, he's been in the Gentile nations for a few years. He's come back, he's in the temple, he gets arrested, and then gets taken to the high priest. He didn't know he was the high priest, because the high priest probably wasn't standing there in his high priest uniform. He's probably standing there in his normal clothes. And that's why the guy said, don't you know who you're talking to? You're talking to the high priest of God. And then Paul says, okay, sorry, I didn't know. And I think that is where we stopped. So, verse 6. But knowing that one part of the Sanhedrin consisted of Tzadukim and the other of Perushim, Shaul shouted, brothers, I myself am a Pharisee and the son of a Pharisee, and it is concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I'm being tried. There's so much going on in this statement. Paul is saying he is a Pharisee. Now, there's two types of people here that we're talking about, Pharisees and Sadducees, and we keep going over this. But we've got to hammer it home. What is a Pharisee? Pharisee, Sadducee. The Pharisees, let's just break it down a little bit. Parushim. Parushim is the Hebrew. Parushim. A parush. It literally means to be separated, to live a pure life. That's what the im is the plural. Parush is someone separated to live a pure and holy life. That's where they get their name from. They were known as the set apart ones. Like Pharisees, but yes, like Pharisees, set apart ones. Okay? It's like a Nazir, a Nazirite. The actual word means set apart, separated. Pharisees, you can think of them as the set apart, separated people. The Tzadukim, this one, yeah, is old. That's an A. Tzadukim. This one's a bit more tricky with their origins and what that word is, but it comes from the sons of Zadok. Now, Zadok is a guy found in the Bible. He was the first high priest of ancient Israel to serve at the first temple. We find him in 1 Chronicles 6, 4-8. And he represents everything that is right. So to be a Zadok means to be right. That's what it literally means. To be right. Now, it obviously plays on the word as well. Righteous. A tzaddik man is a righteous man. And we're going to get into the righteous thing later. But it's to be righteous, to be right. It's the sons of Tzadok. So these guys thought that they could do no wrong, basically. Sadducees and Pharisees, they pretty much hated each other. They never agreed on anything. You can look in the Talmud, and those oaks were always talking against each other. They didn't believe in anything, but let's break it down and see exactly why. So the Pharisees, you guys can tell me, what did they believe? They believe in the afterlife. Yeah? Yes or no? I've spoken about this like 3 times. They believe in the afterlife. What else do they believe in? Right, so they were very much rigid Torah observers, plus the oral law, the traditions. Does everyone know what the oral law is? It's the Mishnah. It's the Mishnaic writings. They believe that when God spoke to Moses on the mountain, God gave him not just the Torah, he gave them a whole whackload of other instructions, which was passed down unbroken from generation to generation until the temple got destroyed and they started writing it. They started codifying it. But if you look at it, I don't really think God will tell you not to flip a light switch because it's Shabbat. Okay? There's a lot of stuff in the Mishnah. There's a lot of books. Okay, but they believed in the Torah and they believed in the oral law. The oral law added on to the Torah. Yes?
Not right to describe it spiritually this if you've got a pencil like this and you're not allowed to touch the pen, then the Mishnah, the oral law,
Yeah.
would put like a boundary around it, so like other pencils, so that it would stop you from touching that pencil.
That's exactly it.
So then you get so focused on that border, you forget about the actual.
The rabbis actually give that interpretation. They say, you know what, yeah, is the law, okay, and to sin is to sort of break down that fence or to build up a fence, right? But you're missing the mark. So what they did is they built a protective fence around it, and that is the oral law. So if you don't break any of the oral laws, you're definitely not going to impede on any of the actual Torah instructions. That's basically what the sages say. But what do we have? We've got this part. This part evolved very much so. Till the point to today, they still have to figure out, okay, I'm a business owner, I run a vending machine. Now what must I do with my vending machine on Shabbat? Or my mall has escalators. So what should I do with the escalators on Shabbat? Because technically it consumes electricity, which is a mini fire, and the Torah says I'm not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat, so what the heck do I do? This is how deep they get. And this is why a lot of Jewish people are running away from the burden of the Judaism. Now, and then a rabbi will say, you know what? You're not allowed to run a vending machine on Shabbat. And you're not allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to do this. They just keep adding to their oral law. They just keep adding to it. That's the problem with this thing. It just keeps evolving and evolving and evolving, where everything that was written in here was enough. The whole thing about not lighting a fire on Shabbat was don't cook on Shabbat. It was in that context. If you actually read it properly, don't cook on Shabbat. Don't light a fire to cook because you should have done that the day before. Just like you got the manna the day before, I don't want you to go get the manna on Shabbat because why? I want you to focus on me. So the one thing about the Pharisees is Torah and oral. The Sadducees, on the other hand, just adhered to Torah. Okay? What else? What else do you know about Pharisees and Sadducees? Yeah, they were the opposite. So no afterlife. Yes, Logan? Pharisees, yeah, and Sadducees? Yes, look at that. They're both E's. Very good. Okay, if you want to look at a bit deeper, Pharisees also believed in angels. And these guys were no angels. This is why they said no afterlife, no angels, no resurrection. They also didn't believe in resurrection. No resurrection.
Yeah,
No.
Evil inclination.
Yeah.
The Sadducees not believe in the evil inclination.
No, they would have, but no afterlife. No rewards either in the afterlife, obviously, because there is no afterlife. These guys believed in rewards and punishment. You see, the Sadducees were, this is your life you've got now, and that's it. Almost very much like the Greek guys that Paul was speaking to, if you think about it.
How would it so different to one another if they were both from the Jewish background?
Remember, they got lost in Babylon at some point.
The Sadducees.
Everyone, all of the Jewish people. Lost in Babylon, things went skew. Look at the Samaritans. Look how many differences the Samaritans have as well. Their Samaritan Torah, there's 6,000 differences in their Torah. Things changed. Which is why when you want to prove the Bible exists, you've got to go right back, and get a lot of sources. And this is why Qumran came in so handy with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So anyway, back to this. Rewards and punishment. The Pharisees believe in that. These guys obviously no rewards, no punishment. These guys were very wealthy and Hellenistic. What does that mean? They were very Greek-like. Hellenism is Greek. They were very Greek-like.
Many gods.
Well, Hellenistic in the way of their lifestyle. Okay? They had a lot of support from the Romans. These guys didn't really like the Romans too much. Okay? They were more democratic, if you can actually think about it. These guys were more liked by the public. They had more support by the public. Gamliel was a Pharisee, had a lot of support with the public. The Pharisees believed in free will and the Sadducees believed in no free will, that there isn't free will. The massive differences between these two guys. Now you've got to tell me, how do these two people run a country? Some people believe in free will, other people not so much. Because he sort of came in and was like, what are you doing here?
They obviously didn't believe in the elect, the Calvinists were.
What do you mean?
The elect, because Calvinists also don't really believe in free will. They believe that there's an elect and
They were very much influenced by a lot of nonsense. These people actually did not like change. And they kept their distance from common people. So they were like the upper echelon of the Jewish people. Very wealthy, very, very affluent. The nice thing about the Pharisees is that they believed that every home was a temple. Every home was a temple, and every table where you eat at that home was an altar. So when they did Shabbat at night, that was the altar, where they're sitting with God in their temple. Every home was a temple, and they focused a lot on charity. Now, you go and you start looking for research about nice things about Sadducees. People sort of focus a lot on the Pharisees. These guys, free will, democratic, the people loved them, and they did a lot of charity work. These guys, no angels, no afterlife, they're sad. But we can't judge them. We don't know if they were good or not. What we do know, however, is Ananias and Caiaphas, those two really corrupt high priests, they were Sadducees. Okay. And then what else? Just while we're here, what other types of people did you get in the time of Yeshua and the time of Paul?
Samaritans.
Yeah, the Samaritans, okay. They're a completely different bunch of people. But the groups in Zealots, Zealots. The Sanhedrin is a mix of these people and these people. Yeah, there's 70 of them. The ratio we don't actually know, but they believe there were more Sadducees. And the Essenes. What are the Essenes?
It's like John the Baptist.
They believe John the Baptist was with them for a while. Why?
Lived in the wilderness.
Yes, and the Essenes really believed. They completely isolated themselves from Jerusalem. They're like, you oaks have lost the plot completely. The temple is corrupt. The high priesthood is corrupt. Rome is in charge. We cannot have this. We're leaving, bye, and we're going to go live in the desert. And they literally went to the Dead Sea and they made a community. There was already some ruins left before the Hasmoneans. The Hasmoneans developed something there, but the Essenes went and they lived there. And when you go to Israel today, you can actually go and see exactly where the Essenes stayed. A community of men. Some people believe that the women stayed outside the camp, but they had only the men inside the camp to stay pure-minded for God. And these people, very much Pharisaical, they believe they were more Pharisaical, but these people were responsible for copying the Torah, for copying the books that we have in the Bible. Everything except for Esther. Yes?
How long did they take to copy this?
Years. What they would actually do before they wrote the name of God, they would go mikveh 7 times. I'm talking, take all clothes off. I've seen their mikveh, it's huge. Take all clothes off, go down into the water, come back up the other side. Go down into the water, come back up the other side. Before writing the name of God. How many times do you see God in the Bible? Plenty.
Didn't they have like the
Yes.
and then they put like a line.
Yes. You go down the one side and you come up the other
So
side.
like the one side you dirty and
Yes.
the other side clean.
Well, what's the idea? You go in and it washes away your impurities. Not just your physical impurities, but you start thinking along the lines of being holy. And you come up different, yes?
No, it's also very cool that they would retire the king and they wrote
Yes,
God's name with.
Yes, I'm getting there. So they'd come up in that mikveh 7 times. Then they would go write God's name. Just the tetragrammaton, actually. Not actually his name. That's how much respect I had for him. The tetragrammaton is the Yud Hey Vav Hey. Yud Hey Vav Hey. Yud Hey Vav Hey. Remember, Hebrews read right to left. Yud Hey Vav Hey. It spells out God's name. They found a letter from one rabbi to another rabbi that says, you know how to pronounce God's name. It's the same vowel pointers as Le'olam, which means forever. Le'olam. And if you actually use the vowel pointers, because in Hebrew they've got a little dot system, it's called nikudot. There's like funny little things like this that you put underneath the letters or above the letters. And that helps you pronounce the actual word. Because this could be a, and a u. So you need to know what is the vav. Is it a? Is it a a? And when they when they looked at le'olam, it's Yehovah. That's what it points out to. We spent months on trying to research this. But the name of God, what we believe is Yehovah. Okay? So when they'd write just this section, that's not actually even his name. It's a contractualized piece of his name because they didn't want to write the name in case a Gentile would read this and profane the name. Because how many times do we, stub our toe, not us obviously, people outside, we stub our toe and we throw out the curse word. Imagine if they knew the real name of God. So they try to protect God's name, but even when they wrote the tetragrammaton, they would write the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters, and then they would take that pen and that pen was done for the day. Okay, what else are we writing? And then carry on writing, and then if they got to God's name again, okay, down and up, down and up, down and up, 7 times, right, that pen's done for the day. That's all they did. Some of them were scribes, some of them were obviously out there trying to make the food for the guys, and then at night they would sit in absolute silence, eat their meal, and at the end of the night, when they're done with their meal, they would sit and do Bible study for a third of the night, basically. And then the next day starts, and so it goes on. These guys, seriously passionate about God. Yeah?
So when they wrote the book and the Bible, was Jesus born by them and then crucified?
When they wrote what?
The book.
Old Testament was already done. New Testament was busy being written. Okay. So these guys, they believed that they were separating themselves because they, in their minds, were preparing the way. That was the words that they used in some of the writing that we find. They looked at the sons of light going against the sons of darkness, and that they were responsible for preparing the way of the Messiah because they believed he was imminently approaching. He was going to be there anytime soon. And this is why we believe that John the Baptist actually came from them, because that was his mindset.
Were some of the disciples that came from John the Baptist in Hebrews?
I wouldn't say they're these guys. I think he probably garnered up his disciples as he went along. Okay. So their scenes believed in the forces of light and darkness. They lived in the desert, heavy big on community living, and they were preparing the way. The Zealots, on the other hand, fought. These guys were a little cray-cray. We're going to study them a bit tonight. They really wanted independence, politically and with their belief. Religion and political independence, and they saw themselves as agents of God's wrath. That's literally how they saw themselves. Think of anarchy, these guys. Really going up against every power that's in place. If it's not God's law in place, we're going to be up against it, to the point where these guys were assassinating people. They were always ready to fight, and generally a lot of them were labeled as the Sicarii. And we're going to get into that now. Sakari. But anyway, what I love about Paul here, Paul's very clever. So just going back to what he was actually saying, listen to what he says. Now that you have this, just focus on this part. He says, brothers, I myself am a Pharisee. Now remember, he's standing in front of the Sanhedrin, whoever was there at the time. And there were Pharisees and there were Sadducees. And he says, I myself am a Pharisee, and the son of Pharisees. And it is concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I am being tried. So he brings this resurrection into play, which was a massive sore point for both parties. So he says, hey guys, you know what? I was just getting tried for the resurrection of the dead. And he knew that's going to spark off something, because these two, listen to what happens. When he said this, an argument arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the crowd was divided. For the Sadducees deny the resurrection and the existence of angels and spirits, whereas the Pharisees acknowledge both. So there was a great uproar, with some of the Torah teachers who were on the side of the Pharisees standing up and joining in. We don't find anything wrong with this man, and if a spirit or an angel spoke to him, what of it? Sounds very much like Gamaliel, right? The dispute became so violent that the commander, fearing that Shaul would be torn apart by them. Who are we speaking about? The leaders of the people. The commander was fearing that Paul was about to be torn apart by them. Ordered the soldiers to go down, take him by force, and bring him back into the barracks. Now, I did a bit of digging. Josephus, you all know Josephus, historian, Jewish historian, sided with the Romans, decided that his way to sort of help the Jewish people would be to write a historical account of what was actually happening. And a lot of his stuff that we have gives us such great insight into what was going on at the time. Great historian. He writes here. He writes about an altercation between the Pharisees and the Sadducees in those days. He says, a skirmish between the high priest and the principal men of the multitude of Jerusalem, i.e. the Pharisees, ended in both sides casting stones at each other. And then he carries on and he says, and there was no one to reprove them. And he carries on and it says, as if the city had no government over it. So the very leaders that are responsible for the city and their country, so to speak, were casting stones at each other. Because Paul's standing there. I don't know if it was this exact moment that Josephus is talking about, but you see God shaking the very foundation of that whitewashed wall right now. Their stones are coming apart. All because Paul says this. So how temperamental was, or how fragile was that structure to start off with? And God likes to do that sometimes with us. He shakes the very foundation we have in order to wake us up. You know, my foundation, I was so strong in myself and in my strength that God literally took the foundation out from under me. And I'm sure He's done that with a lot of us. Because the point is to break down that wall so we can see Him. And we can experience what He's done for us. Let's move on. 11. The following night the Lord stood by him and said, take courage, for just as you have borne a faithful witness to me in Jerusalem, so now you must bear witness in Rome. So here's Yeshua talking to him again, and he's like, don't worry, Paul, everything's going to be okay. You're going to Rome, my boy. And Paul must have been, Rome. This is not going to be fun. Because remember, where was Paul's heart? With the Jewish people. That's why he was standing there giving his testimony, and they still wanted to kill him. So, the next day, some of the Judeans formed a conspiracy. They took an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Shaul. More than 40 were involved in this plot. Now, these people, who are they? Who are these people that want to kill Paul? Who do you think they are in this group? No. That maybe they had a hand in it, but yes, these guys. There's a group of people called the Sikarim, the Sikari. 1 Sikari, 2 Sikarim. And if you look in Wikipedia, these guys were, it says here, the Sikari were a splinter group of the Jewish zealots who, in the decades preceding Jerusalem's destruction in 70 CE, so this is this time, strongly opposed the Roman occupation of Judea and attempted to expel them and their sympathizers from the area. The Sikari carried something called this. Who knows how to pronounce that?
Sikai.
That's what I thought. All right. How do you spell Caesar? It's weird, huh? This is Caesar, right? Am I right? This says Caesar. So what does this now say? Now that you have that? Sisi. They carried around something called a sisi, which was like a dagger. It was like this. It's like either a short sword or a dagger, a long dagger, very sharp, and they would use this to assassinate people. So they ran around with their sisi. I don't know if someone said, "Hey, what's that?" This is my sisi. I wouldn't be too proud of it, but anyway. So they ran around with their daggers, and I suppose that means we should call them Siseri. But anyway, these guys, why would Paul be a target for them? Think about it. Who's Paul a disciple of? It's not a hard question. Who's he a disciple of? Yeah, Yeshua. Now, what did Yeshua say about your enemies? Love your enemy. What did these guys say about the enemies? You're going to die. Yeshua is saying, love your enemies. These guys want to kill them. Also, Yeshua taught, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Do you think these guys wanted to give tax to the Roman Empire? No. The only thing they wanted to give them was this. Okay? So this, Paul and his teaching must have driven them absolutely bonkers. Must have brought you for you, boy.
Was Barnabas a zealot?
No. You get zealots and you get these guys, eh? Just so you know. These guys are a splinter cell. They're the undercover oaks that want to go wipe out people. But anyway, so they considered the disciples of Yeshua their enemies because of obviously what Yeshua was actually teaching. They didn't like that. And they also hated the Gentiles. Now, what was Paul teaching at the time? God is not only for the Jewish people, but hey, he's also for the Gentiles. It would have driven these oaks nuts. And then Paul was also Roman, right?
Yeah.
So prime target. Yeah. So Paul was a definite prime target. They wanted him dead. So much so that they took an oath. Now remember, in a Torah mindset, if you take an oath, it's as good as done. You have to do it. So these guys take an oath and they say they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. It doesn't say until Paul dies. It says until they kill him. Yeah?
But it's scientifically proven if you don't drink water for 7 days, you'll die.
Okay. Why are we bringing this up?
Because they're taking an oath
Yes.
forever.
Right. But this is the thing, right? So how dangerous do you think these men are? No, they're very dangerous because they've now committed pretty much social suicide, if you can call it that. If they don't kill Paul, they have to not eat. So they become very dangerous. And where were we? They went to the head Kohanim and the elders and said, "We have bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food until we have killed Paul. What you are to do is make it appear to the commander that you and the Sanhedrin want to get more accurate information about Paul's case so that he will bring him down to you while we, for our part, are prepared to kill him before he ever gets here." So here's the plot. So they must have had someone on the inside willing to do this. Think of Ananias, who Paul just called a whitewashed wall. Okay, it's possible. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it's possible. But, verse 16, but the son of Shaul's sister got wind of the planned ambush, and he went into the barracks and told Shaul. Shaul called one of the officers and said, take this man up to the commander. He has something to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, the prisoner Shaul called me and asked me to bring you this young man to you because he has something to tell you. The commander took him by the hand and led him aside privately and asked, what is it you have to tell me? He said, the Judeans have agreed to ask you tomorrow to bring Shaul down to the Sanhedrin on the pretext that they want to investigate his case more thoroughly, but don't let yourself be talked into it because more than 40 men are lying in wait for him. They have taken an oath neither to eat nor to drink until they kill him, and they are ready now, only waiting for you to give your consent to their request. The commander let the young man go, cautioning him, don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me. Then he summoned 2 of his captains and said, get 200 infantry soldiers. 200 soldiers. Ready to leave for Caesarea at 9 o'clock tonight, and 70 mounted horsemen, cavalry, and 200 spearmen. Wow. That's a lot of people for one guy. Also provide replacements for Shaul's horse when it gets tired, and bring him through safely to Felix the governor. Why so many men? We've got 470 men plus multiple horses in case they get tired. He was a Roman citizen, but they knew that these Sicarii zealots were crazy. And they, bound by an oath, could probably muster up quite a large force of men. And if you actually have a look on the map between Jerusalem and Caesarea Maritima, there's a lot of places to ambush these guys. So, another interesting fact about this whole thing is they're getting ready to leave. And this is the last time Paul sees Jerusalem. And the commander wrote the following letter. From Claudius Lysias to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Judeans and was about to be killed by them when I came on scene with my troops and rescued him. He's puffing himself up quite nicely. After learning that he was a Roman citizen, I wanted to understand exactly what they were charging him with. How did he find out he was a Roman citizen? They wanted to whip him. Does he mention that in here? No, saving himself. So I brought him down to their Sanhedrin. Their Sanhedrin. I found that he was charged in connection with questions of their Torah, but there was no charge deserving death or prison. But when I was informed of a plot against this man, I immediately sent him to you and also ordered his accusers to state their case against him before you. So, who's writing this book of Acts? No, Luke. Luke must have had access to the Roman archives if he pulled up this letter. So verse 31. So the soldiers, following their orders, took Shaul during the night and brought him to Antipatris. What does yours say? Does yours also say Antipatris? Antipatris. Yeah, I had to look into this. I look into all of the funny little words. Antipatris actually is Tel Afek. Tel Afek. This means mound or archaeological grounds. Afek is a place. Tel Afek. What happened in the Bible at Tel Afek? This is halfway now to Caesarea Maritima. Before we get into Tel Afek, Herod the Great built Antipatris on top of the ruins of Afek in honor of his father Antipater. So that's why it's called Antipatris, in honor of Herod the Great's father Antipater, and he built it for Romans. But if you actually have a look at it, it's built on the ruins of Afek. Can anyone remember what happened at Afek? Vanessa, you've been to Israel. Afek is the place where the Israelites were about to fight the Philistines, and they just randomly went and took the Ark for the Covenant out. And they said, let's just take the Ark for the Covenant because then God's with us and we will win. And they took the Ark for the Covenant out, and the Philistines took one look at the Ark for the Covenant and they started freaking out big time. And they were like, oh my word, that thing, I remember that thing. That thing is the God that destroyed the Egyptians. And the Bible says that they were freaking out, paraphrased, and they mustered themselves together and they basically said, guys, this is it, let's do this. It's now or never. Let's just go fight. And they fought the Israelites, and they killed 30,000 Israelite men, and the rest of them went scattering. This is in 1 Samuel 4. And the rest of them went scattering, and they captured the Ark for the Covenant. The Ark, which symbolized everything for those people. What was in the Ark?
The Ten Commandments,
Okay.
Aaron's staff, and the manna.
The manna. Everything that meant something to them. That 10 Commandments was literally their covenant. Without that, they had no claim to the land, basically. And they lost it. And then some Benjamin, young guy from the tribe of Benjamin, he ran back to, can't remember the place where Eli was. Eli was the high priest at the time. He ran back, and Eli was 98 or something. You can check me. He was 98, and he was sitting outside by the gates because that's where the leaders sat. And this Benjaminite runs up to him and tells him the story, and Eli falls over and breaks his neck, and he's dead. Why? The guy runs up to him and he's like, your sons are dead. Hophni and Pinchas, they dead. And he's like, what else? And he's like, we lost the Ark for the Covenant. And then he just fell over and he died. He didn't fall over and die when his sons were dead. That was painful for him. But when he found out that the Ark for the Covenant was gone, that's when he literally fell over dead. Anyway, they landed up back with the Ark for the Covenant. Does anyone know how? The Philistines took the Ark for the Covenant and they put it in their temple to Dagon. And the temple, the actual statue. Yes, quickly.
So they put the Ark of the Covenant, not the Ark of the Covenant in the temple, and then they put it where a statue of a god was. When they came back in the morning, the statue was lying on the floor with its legs cut off.
Its arms and its head. The second time, the arms and its head were off. And then the priests were like, what the heck is going on here? And it says up until that day, they never crossed the threshold, the entrance to that temple again. But they started moving it from one Philistine place to another because tumors and sickness broke out in their towns. To the point where they realized it's this Ark for the Covenant that's doing this to us. Let's just send it to our neighbors. They send it to Ashdod, they send it to Ashkelon, all the Philistine countries. And the same thing happens there. So eventually they all get together and they're like, you know what? It's not worth it. Put this thing on 2 unyoked oxen. And let's put 5 gold models of tumors and 5 gold models of rats on the back of that thing and send it off. Because they thought they were making an offer to God by doing that. And they send it back, and it goes all the way back to Bet Shemesh. And the people see the oxen coming, and the Ark for the Covenant comes back, and they all celebrated. But it kind of teaches us a nice little lesson in Tel Afek when you go there, is that don't dangle God as a talisman for you. You can't go do stupid things and say God is with you when He hasn't told you to go do stupid things. So don't think that just because you're putting yourself in danger or putting yourself in a difficult situation or putting yourself in a dangerous situation, that God's going to be there for you when He hasn't said to you, go tell those people something or go tell that person something. If there's a mob breaking out and you run into the middle in your own strength and you say, God loves you, and you disappear in the middle of the mob, that's in your own strength. However, if God says to you, go do that, you can be guaranteed it's going to have a different outcome. These guys took the Ark for the Covenant into battle when God didn't even tell them to. They didn't even go to God and ask Him. They're just like, hey, go grab that thing in Shiloh. Let's go. Because when we had that thing the last time, all things were going well for us. Don't use God as a talisman. That's not why He's there for. Okay? Next thing. 32. Then return to the barracks after leaving the cavalry to go on with him. So then now they're in Tel Afek. They're halfway to Caesarea Maritima. Remember, Caesarea Maritima is the port city in Jerusalem, in Israel, where Paul was actually, he was using Caesarea Maritima as a place to go out to spread the gospel. Now he's arrested, he's going to be there, and it's going to be the final place that he goes out to Rome. Then returned to the barracks after leaving the cavalry to go on with him. The cavalry took him to Caesarea, delivered the letter to the governor, and handed Shaul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. On learning he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a full hearing after your accusers have also arrived, and ordered him to be kept under guard in Herod's headquarters. Lovely place to be in Caesarea Maritima. It was like the jewel of the Mediterranean. It was really a nice place. And he was most likely in the palace, in some room in the palace. Great. Chapter 24. After 5 days, hang on, did I tell you guys about Felix? No. Just got to know a little bit about Felix before we continue. Because remember this commander, this Claudius Lysias, the commander, is writing to Felix. So Felix is the next guy that Paul is going to give his third defense to. Now Felix was the Roman procurator. Procurator of Judea in between 52 and 60. And he succeeded a guy called Cumanus. But there's two types of procurators. There's a fiscal officer and there's a provincial governor. The fiscal guy is pretty much the finance guy. Boring, it's fine. I think Felix was the provincial governor because he headed up the civil and the judicial administration and was in charge of the military. So I think Felix was the governor. So Felix was previously, and you guys have got to understand this because this you need to have in the back of your mind when he starts speaking to the next guy, Festus. Felix was previously the governor of Samaria in 48 to 52 AD, while Cumanus was the governor in Judea. Cumanus did a terrible job. Now, if you want to know what a terrible job in the Roman Empire is, if you are in charge of Judea and there's riots and things not going well, and there's quite a few riots, sorry for you, you get a demotion. You go down in rank. So you must understand, in the Roman Empire, if you are in charge of a province or a territory, you can go up and down the ladder, so to speak, the corporate ladder. Judea was one of the last steps in the corporate ladder. It was a terrible place to be. Why? Because these people are constantly rioting. So if you don't like the guy, if Emperor didn't like you, if Nero didn't like you, it'd be like, you, go look after Judea. But first, first Felix had Samaria, which was one up on Judea. So he says, you go look after Samaria. Clearly, he didn't do a good job in Samaria, and Cumanus did a terrible job in Judea, so the emperor put Felix into Judea. Now, Felix must be pretty much stressed out because he knows he's like at the end of his career pretty much. I mean, the next step is probably Iceland, who knows? I mean, if you do a terrible job after Judea, what happens to you? We don't actually know. If you've got good connections, we find out where Felix goes later. I'll tell you, Nana. But Tacitus, another historian, he wrote about Felix. He said, with all cruelty and lust, he exercised the power of a king with the spirit of a slave. Felix was a freed slave of Emperor Claudius's mother, Antonia. Remember, in the Roman Empire, you could adopt someone. Right? You could adopt someone, and that person would have more power than your biological son, basically. Would have more authority than your biological son. So Felix was actually a freed slave. And Felix had 3 wives, one of them being Drusilla. And we're going to talk about Drusilla in a little bit. And this will all come together just now. But anyway, Cumanus, previous guy, there was a lot of riots. He failed to suppress the riots, so he got kicked out. If I remember correctly, he died not so long after that. But then Felix now takes over. So this is exactly why the commander is writing to Felix. Chapter 24, verse 1 says, after 5 days, the high priest, Ananias, came down with some elders and a lawyer named Tertullus, and they presented their case against Shaul to the governor. Shaul was called, and Tertullus began to make the charges. So now they're all standing in front of Felix. Okay? Picture this in your head. They're all standing in front of Felix, and it's a court session taking place. So Tertullus, lovely name, says, Felix, your excellency, it is because of you that we enjoy unbroken peace, and it is your foresight that has brought to this nation so many reforms in so many areas. It is with the utmost gratitude that we receive this. But in order not to take up too much of your time, I beg your indulgence to give us a brief hearing. So he's flattering him. We have found this man a pest. Lovely. He is an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazratim. What does yours say? How much? Nazarenes. Anyone? Any other translations? Verse 5. A sect of the Nazarenes. A ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. What does that mean? Please explain for me. Where was Yeshua born? Meh. Meh. Ding dong. He was born in Bethlehem. I always get mixed up between the two. This is what I'm asking you. Why is he the ringleader of Nazareth? First of all, what is the difference between a Nazarene and a Nazarite? Yes. What's a Nazarene and a Nazarite? That's a Nazarite. That's a Nazarite. Yes. See, you mustn't get mixed up. Nazarene is old. Nazarene.
Nazarene is somebody from, they couldn't leave their hair to grow too long, unlike the Nazarite.
Nazarite numbers 6, 21 onwards.
Yeah.
Nazarene, someone from Nazareth.
But that's, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but his parents were from Nazareth, they go there for a census.
Why? Yeah, spot on. Why did they have to go there for a census? What a silly thing to do. Does that seem silly? A lot of people have actually argued the validity of that, to be honest. It seems silly for Yeshua's parents to have to go all the way to Nazareth for a count. A lot of people actually dispute the fact that that actually happened, but if you look at it, they've actually found a papyrus dated to AD 104, which records an Egyptian prefect who ordered Egyptians to return to their ancestral homes so that a census could be taken. And this was after the fact, eh? So yes, Yeshua was born in Bethlehem. Why? Why Bethlehem?
Because the Roman Empire said that everyone had to go back.
No.
It was prophesied.
Micah 5. It was prophesied in Micah 5, correct. And then we find out in Luke 2 that Joseph went from Bethlehem to Nazareth for a census. So this we identify with Yeshua more than Bethlehem. Why? Because, someone said it earlier, he grew up in there. So if you were born in Port Elizabeth but you grew up in Boksburg, are you a Port Elizabethan?
No, Oxford.
You're a Boksburgian. That's why Yeshua from Nazareth is called Yeshua from Nazareth, because he grew up there. They went back to Nazareth after the census. He was born in Bethlehem, went back to Nazareth after the census.
Where does Galilee come in?
Galilee is an area.
Carpenter of Galilee.
Yeah, but Galilee is an area around the Sea of Galilee, which included those towns. So the funny thing about this is God used the Roman roads to get the gospel out. But he also used the Roman law of taking a census to make prophecy come true. So he literally forced Joseph and them to go to Bethlehem at the right time so that Jesus could be born in Bethlehem, so that Micah 5 verse 2 is not incorrect. And then they'll end up going down to Egypt, so that the other prophecy is not incorrect either. So let's carry on. Let's try to finish 24 quickly. Where Where was I? Yes, 6. He even tried to profane the temple, but we arrested him. By questioning this man yourself, you will be able to learn about all the things which we are accusing him. The Judeans also joined in the accusation and alleged that these were the facts. They were not the facts. When the governor motioned for Shaul to speak, he replied, now this is Paul speaking, I know that you have been a judge over this nation for a number of years. So I am glad to make my defense. As you can verify for yourself, it has not been more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and neither in the temple nor in the synagogues nor anywhere else in the city did they find me either arguing with anyone or collecting a crowd. So he's saying he's not a pest. He hasn't agitated anyone. He's defending himself. Nor can they give any proof of the things which they are accusing me. But this I do admit to you. I worship the God of our fathers in accordance with the way, which they call a sect. I continue to believe everything that accords with the Torah or the law and everything written in the prophets. And I continue to have hope in God, which they too accept. And there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Indeed, it is because of this that I make a point of always having a clear conscience in the sight of both God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring a charitable gift to my nation and to offer sacrifices. It was in connection with the latter that they found me in the temple. I had been ceremonially purified. I was not with the crowd and I was not causing a disturbance. But some Jews from the province of Asia, they ought to be here before you to make a charge if they have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves say what the crime they found me guilty of when I stood in front of the Sanhedrin. Other than this one thing which I shouted out when I was standing among them, I am on trial before you today because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. But Felix, who had rather detailed knowledge of things connected with the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will decide your case. This commander is the same commander in Acts 21 that arrested Paul. Okay, so he's waiting for that commander that saved Paul from the crowd that wanted to whip him. That's this commander. Now this commander, what you need to know of, is described as a tribune of the cohort. A cohort is a military unit, and a tribune is a commander, and there were 6 tribunes in a legion. So this guy, this is why he had so many men at his disposal, 200 soldiers, 70 cavalry, and 200 spearmen. He had a lot of guys at his disposal. So he was pretty high up. So Felix is saying, let's wait for this guy, and let's hear from him. Verse 23. He ordered the captain to keep Shaul in custody, but let him have considerable liberty and not prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Shaul and listened to him as he spoke about trusting in the Messiah Yeshua. There's some other manuscripts that state that Drusilla wanted Paul to come speak. But what we have here is Felix calling him. And listen what happens. Kiddies, slow down here, guys. It says here, 24. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Shaul and listened to him as he spoke about trusting in Messiah Yeshua. But when Shaul began to discuss righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, for the time being, go away. I will send for you when I get a chance. At that same time, he hoped that Shaul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him rather often and kept talking with him. Now, what I love about Paul is he takes every opportunity. He knows Drusilla's Jewish. So he takes this one opportunity and he says, you know what, this is the great granddaughter of King Herod the Great. I'm going to reach her. Yeah, obviously his heart is with the Jewish people. He's like, I'm going to reach this woman. She was obviously curious about the way. So Paul takes this opportunity and he starts talking about righteousness, self-control, and judgment. 3 very interesting things to talk about. Now, we spoke about righteousness 1 or 2 weeks ago. What is righteousness? What is righteousness?
It's when you be clean and be set apart from other people.
Yes.
And you're and they call you confused Christians.
You know, I can just imagine Paul standing there and saying, Drusilla, Felix, you have to die to sin and live to righteousness. And obey the word, because that will be your righteousness. And he's pulling verses. And Drusilla would have known these verses. So he's pretty much giving a sermon in front of Felix and his merry men and Drusilla. And then he goes on, he starts talking about self-control. Kiddies? Fruits of the Spirit?
Love, peace, patience,
Ah.
faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Somebody must say.
What's that? Love, joy, peace, patience?
Kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, patience, kindness, faithfulness, goodness, self-control.
It's this one. It's actually this one. It's forbearance. It's long-suffering. It's more linked to patience than anything else. Self-control. Okay. So self-control is one of the gifts of the Spirit in Galatians 5. I think it is Galatians 5. And it's considered one of the really necessary, one of the most necessary gifts to live a godly life. So I figured we'd take 10 minutes and talk about that. Self-control. Tell me, what is self-control? Kiddies, I'll draw a picture for you now, don't worry. And you can copy from the picture. Okay? Alright, then tell me what self-control is. Gabriella? Self-control, yes.
Is that more likely to go, for example, if someone goes to a shop and then they love liquor so much? And
Oh, you know this person well, do you?
yes, I do.
Yes?
And then if they really want it, but their dad says no, and they like want it, and they say, I want. But instead of doing that, you must rather not go to the shop and just leave it and listen to your dad.
Yes. That's spot on, boy. Well done. Well done. Self-control. Guys, a lot of our messed up society is as a result of lack of self-control, right? Let's just think about that for a second. A lot of the issues we face today is as a result of lack of self-control. Yes, Susanna?
Control is when you go to the sweet shop and they really want to sell chocolate.
Yes, and then you
So intelligent.
and you can't have 7, hey? You can only have 6. That's right. So, self-control is a difficult one. Let's just be honest, right? It's easy to love, right? Maybe not your enemies, but it's easy to love the people you love. Yes? You should love everyone. Joy depends on the occasion, I suppose. Joy, happiness, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. When we're angry, are we gentle? No, but we should be. Faithfulness, goodness, self-control. To be in faith, to have faith. So I want to talk about self-control. How to develop self-control. Because I think it's something we all battle with. Hey, Logie. Come, open your book. We're going to draw a picture now. I want you guys to think of something. Let me draw a picture for you kids so you guys can have something here. Okay, number one thing, there's, 6 or so points that I've put here, how to develop self-control. The first thing is know God's word and will on your life. It's an easy one, but a lot of us don't know God's word. So we don't actually know what's right and what's wrong. I want to paint a little picture for you guys. Think of your life as a car traveling. You have 4 wheels and you're sitting over there. If you're in America, I suppose. I want you to think of this line as God's will. And I want you to think of this line as your will. And you are the driver. Now tell me, if God's will is for you to drive straight at that point, but your will is to turn left, what's going to happen to the car?
Let it break.
You have one wheel doing this and one wheel going straight. Things are not going to be very, very good. Things are going to rattle. there's going to be no peace. There's going to be no harmony in your life. Because you want to do what you want to do, but God's will is not that. God's will is one direction, your will is the other direction. Having self-control is bringing those two in alignment. Will alignment. Think of it like that. Your life needs to be in line with God's will. You need to allow Him to direct you and not go where you want to go. So you need to know God's will and His Word. Because if you know His Word, you know where you need to aim for. Number 2, we're going to end off on this tonight. You need to train yourself. Let's use chocolate as a nice one. Chocolate and donuts. So if you go to the shop and you have excess money, do you buy a chocolate? When you know you shouldn't buy chocolate because you've just had a chocolate. A lot of people might actually do it otherwise. That's a small example. But what happens to a person that has a problem with cigarettes, for example? Someone that smokes. It's hard to give up on that, right? It's hard to say no. Why? Because you're addicted to it. Is there self-control if there's an addiction? No. Is it God's will being done if you're addicted to something? No. Is it your will? Yes. The addiction, you are steering the addiction. The thing is, we need to train ourselves. And remember I spoke about bodybuilders. If you go to gym and you train your muscles get big. But do we ever train our minds to say no? To say no to our flesh? This is the point. We have to say no to our flesh. Because our flesh wants what our flesh wants. So what I'm suggesting is you start with the small things. Do I need that 14th coffee? Do I need that chocolate today when it's not good for me? Do I need that cigarette? Do I need that beer? No. Start with the small things. Say no at least a few times a day to yourself. Because if we're always going with what we want, I'll use myself as an example. If we're always going with what we want, like me, okay, I feel like a coffee, let me go have a coffee. If I had to count how many coffees I had in a day, I'll probably have like 6 or 7. That's not good for me. So maybe I should, at one point, say, you know what? When I want coffee, I should say no to myself. No. And that's a small thing. But the more that we say no to ourselves with the small things, we'll give ourselves enough training and mental power for the bigger things. So if you're battling to give up an addiction, try with the smaller things first. It is very difficult to give up an addiction. Trust me, I've been through nearly every addiction known to man. It is hard. It is hard when God's not with you, and it's easier when God's with you. If you have God in your life, it becomes easier, and this is where we're getting into now. And that's the other thing. When you know God's word, you are aware of the dangers. You're aware of the dangers, right? Out of anyone in the Bible, who spoke the most about hell?
Jesus.
Yes. Yes, he did. Then it's a scary topic, right? But you got to understand. This one pastor put it quite nicely. He said that his son was super skinny, and then he grew up and he went off to the army. But before he went to the army, they used to wrestle each other a lot. That was their thing. They would wrestle. And his dad would always win. He would always pin his child down. That's just how it was, because he was bigger and stronger, and this is how it is. And then his son went to the army. He was a skinny guy. And when he came back a couple of years later, he was a big guy, muscles. And he said, "Come, Dad, let's wrestle." And Dad's like, "Okay." And they started wrestling, and his son was like folding him like a pretzel in every way. And the pastor said, "You know what? I had to resort to my final move." And eventually his son was like tapping out. He's like, "Okay, Dad, you win." And he's like, "Am I stronger than the army guys?" And he's like, "Yes, Dad, you're stronger than the army guys." And he's like, "Okay, let's call it quits before you kill me." And I want to paint a little picture for you there. The enemy likes to do that with us. We can be strong. We can go get trained up. We can have big mental muscles in the kingdom. But it'll take one pinky to bend you out of shape and to submit to the enemy. It will take one little thing. And I want to remind you of the root system that we drew last week. The little root system. One poisoned root means a poisoned tree, means a poisoned fruit, means that the life that is spread through that fruit as it falls to the ground or a bird grabs it and takes it is poisoned. Less fruit, less life, less goodness in the world. That's what it comes down to. That one little pinky, your one little weakness the enemy will use against you. So what do you need to do? You need to be aware of the dangers. And you need to know what's right and what's wrong. Think of that one thing. Is it cigarettes? Is it alcohol? Is it drugs? Is it gambling? Is it lust? Is it greed? There's something in our lives that we need to grab hold of, and we need to say, you know what, Abba? This is not from you. This is the one thing that I still have that's not pure, that's not holy, that's not in line with your will. And this thing keeps veering me off and trying to throw me off a cliff. So it brings us to the next thing. When you are prepared to give that up, comes suffering. And you think, wow, I don't want to suffer. But let me tell you something. If you're addicted to alcohol, or you're addicted to smoking, and you give up smoking, or you give up alcohol,
No.
hold on, and you give that stuff up, it's hard. Am I right?
Yes.
When I gave up drinking, my body, and I gave up with the help of God, but my body was craving alcohol in a massive way. Guys, I even went on antabuse. I was on antabuse to stop me from drinking. It's a pill you take. The doctor gives it to you because he knows that you need to stop drinking. He gives you a pill. You take that pill in the morning. If you drink for the next 3 days, you get so sick you might end up in hospital. So it poisons you against alcohol. Drank that up. Didn't work for me. The only thing that worked for me was God. God had me flat on my back, and he basically read my rights to me. But anyway, after that, my body craved alcohol. I had the strength of God to say no, but my body was suffering. I had to stop myself from driving into the pub on the way home. Abba, help me. Drive straight. Your will be done. Your body craves it physically and mentally. You feel as if you're suffering. But I got to tell you, when that is broken, when you are filled with the Spirit and that stuff is broken, you know, when you go to rehab, they focus on sobriety. What is sobriety?
It's abstaining from alcohol.
It's abstaining from alcohol, but it's this constant thing of I'm 1 day sober, I'm 2 days sober, I'm 1 year sober, I'm 1.5 years sober. It's always I'm sober. Hold on. But it's, you're constantly thinking, I'm the opposite of drunk. I'm sober. What's the difference between sobriety and deliverance? You don't think of it anymore. I can go sit in a pub. I'm delivered from that. I can go sit in a pub and say, hey, you heard of Jesus? Oh, you want a beer? No, go away. Can't even pay me to have that beer. That's not me anymore. My will is God's will. That's the difference between sobriety and deliverance. When God has delivered you from something, it's going to take 2 steps on your behalf. God's just not going to magically deliver you. You have to be obedient. It's going to take 2 steps, but He's going to take the other 8 for you. If God was not in that picture, you would have to take all 10, and I promise you that is near impossible. Because those steps get longer and longer and longer and longer. I tried many times to give up smoking. I tried many times to give up drinking without God until God stepped into my life. And a whole bunch of other addictions. But be prepared to suffer, because when you are delivered from it, there's a feeling of liberation, of freedom. You no longer worry about that sin, it's gone. Next. Follow your Messiah. You got to ask yourself, am I imitating Yeshua? If I'm doing what I'm doing, am I imitating Yeshua? Did Yeshua drink 17 cups of coffee a day? Most likely not. I don't see any scripture that backs that up. I wish I could, but I don't. I don't. Do I see him drinking? Do I see him fornicating? Do I see him smoking? Do I see him breaking up the good old green plant and having a puff? No. I don't. I don't see it. You've got to ask yourself, am I imitating my Messiah? When Yeshua went to those disciples and he said, Lech achorai. He said, come follow me. Lech achorai, follow me. Be like me. And it brings me to, for those of us that are old enough to remember those What Would Jesus Do bracelets. Right, you got all different colors, and it became a thing in the schools, and it was amazing because now everyone had What Would Jesus Do? And what was the point of that?
If you like gotta do something wrong, and then you look on your wrist and it says what will Jesus do?
It's a reminder, hey? Then you'd think, would Jesus cheat in this test? Would Jesus steal that bubble gum? Would Jesus do this? No. Okay, then I mustn't do it. This is the thing. This is the ancient version of a What Would Jesus Do bracelet. But remember, God said one thing of importance to the people, and it's repeated in Leviticus 11 and in 1 Peter 1. It says, be holy for I am holy. Be holy for I am holy. A holy man does not drink a case of beer. A holy man does not finish a packet of smokes. A holy man does not drink himself into a stupor or go gambling or be greedy or be lustful. Nor would a holy woman. Be holy for I am holy. And number 6. The most important step. Pray. Pray for help. In Luke 22, 39 to 40, Yeshua himself says, pray that you may not enter temptation. But temptation will come. That's what the enemy is there for. Temptation will come, but God promises you one thing with that temptation. 1 Corinthians 10:13, he says that you will not be tempted with the things that are beyond what you can bear. But you have to endure it. You've got to endure. So there's going to come temptation. We have to model ourselves after Yeshua. When he was filled with the Spirit, what happened? It says, he went full of the Spirit into the wilderness. And the enemy tempted him 3 times. What did he use to rebuke the temptation? Torah. He actually used Torah. He used the Word of God. This is the Word of God. You need to use the Word of God, all of it, to rebuke temptation. When you start thinking lustfully, Jesus said, just thinking about a woman like that is adultery. I can't do that. Capture that thing, move it on, think of a positive thing. Okay? God will provide a way to escape it. Romans 8 verse 13, I wrote that down. I just want to read that quickly. It says here, for if you live according to your old nature, you will certainly die. But if by the Spirit you keep putting to death the practices of the body, you will live. There's the formula. By the Spirit. When the Holy Spirit comes in you, you have the power to move past that temptation. Don't discredit yourself. If you are baptized, you have the power of self-control. You just need to exercise it. You need to pray that God helps you with that, to give you strength. You need to realize what you're doing is wrong. You need to realize that that's not what Yeshua would have done. You need to know the dangers of it. If I keep doing this, I don't know what's going to happen. But there's consequence. Just remember, we're going to have to stand up one day and give an account of the things that we've done. Whether we have Yeshua or not, Yeshua gives us that salvation. We enter the kingdom. But we will still stand. Abba, I did this and this and this and this. And he's like, let's go through. You did all of this. Thank you. It was your gift of salvation that I sent that saves you from that sin. The transgression of that sin means death. You should die. But how? We can't keep pushing the envelope, can we? We need to be kingdom focused. Say no to your flesh. Okay? And then we ended off with, after 2 years, verse 27 says, after 2 years, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant the Judeans a favor, he left Shaul in prison. Now, the one thing that I found quite, and this is what we're going to end off with, fascinating. Felix obviously never made the cut. Remember old Cumanus? Gone. Felix is now gone. Agrippa comes down, Agrippa II comes down, and he basically institutes a new high priest called Ishmael at this time. And at the same time, he's like, Felix, you, sir, step down. Festus is going to take over. Porcius Festus takes over. But what I want to tell you guys, Felix and Drusilla, we actually see Nero remove them from the office in Judea, and they moved to Pompeii in Italy. 20 years later, Pompeii no more. We don't know if they were still there or not, but we just got to hope that when Paul delivered that message to Felix and Drusilla, that they took hold of the hope of Yeshua, because they landed up at the foot of Mount Vesuvius. And 20 years later, that place we all know is no more. The volcano erupted and they'll all be gone. And that's where we leave off, guys. Festus, when he comes in, he had a no-nonsense attitude. He quickly brought everything under control. I would too if I was him. I mean, I just saw Cumanus get kicked out. I saw Felix get kicked out. And obviously because he was with Drusilla, they sent him to Pompeii, a nice little place. If he probably didn't have Drusilla, he would have been in the middle of nowhere, most likely. But we have now Festus, and now this will be Paul's fourth defense that we're going to go into to Festus. But Felix left Paul in prison, pretty much imprisoned, and Festus then took over. That's the end of Acts 24. Guys, I just want to make you aware of something. In the lunar calendar, we have now entered something called the month of Elul. Has anyone ever heard of the month of Elul?
Elul.
When, this is completely out of Acts now. When the Israelites went off to Babylon, before they went to Babylon, it was month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, month 5, month 6, and so on. When they went to Babylon, they came up with some pretty crazy names for their months, much like we have weird names for our months, which are based on gods and all sorts of other nonsense. Elul is Old Akkadian, which means harvest. Now, why I'm telling you all of this is because traditionally, and we know that Yeshua would have kept traditions as well. We see him keeping traditions in many occasions. But traditionally, the month of Elul is the month where man needs to make right with man. Because if you have a look at Matthew 5, I think it's 22 or whatever, Yeshua himself says, if you're at the altar and you have not made right with man, leave your gift at the altar and go make right with man before you come back to me. So why do we do this in the 6th month? Elul is the 6th month. What is 6 a representation of? Man. Because come the 7th month, what is 7 a representation of? Completion. Come the 7th month, this needs to be taken care of. Man was created on the 6th day. Okay? Yeshua himself says, go make right with man before you come to God with your offering, with your gift, or whatever the case is. So what we have is the month of Elul precedes the 7th month. And traditionally, you go around and you ask every person for forgiveness. Because if you're not right with man, Yeshua says you're not right with God. If you have wronged your brother or your sister, whatever the case is, you need to go ask for forgiveness. We have to forgive and we have to ask for forgiveness. Okay? This is a pretty basic thing in the kingdom. We need to forgive. If you harbor that unforgiveness, it poisons you. So you need to start thinking nicely. And the first time I had to do this, it was really hard. And I'm like, wow, I've done a lot of bad things to people. But if I want my conscience, like Paul says, to be clear before God, because, you know, we're going into feasts coming up. We've got Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and we've got Sukkot coming up as well, which we like to observe as a way to be close with God. Yom Teruah is that shofar blowing, you know, when Yeshua comes down on the cloud in 1 Thessalonians 4, it's that blast and Yeshua arrives. It's a wake-up call. Get right with man, because in the 7th month you've got Yom Teruah, you've got that alarm. You've got Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where you need to make right with God. And then you've got Sukkot. Sukkot is God dwelling with you. It's a picture of future. That final Sukkot, where we are dwelling with God and God is dwelling with us, that is Sukkot. But the Day of Judgment also comes before that. Now you can pray and ask for forgiveness at any point in time. You don't need a specific day. It's a nice thing to have a specific day, and it's a nice thing to have the 6th month, where you can be cognizant of the fact that, you know what, if I've done something to upset Glenn, I need to send Glenn a message and say, you know what, Glenn, if I've done anything to upset you, please forgive me. And hey, we've got social media today, so we can just stick it on Facebook and say, if I've upset you, forgive me. But if you know that you've upset someone, you need to go to them and say, I think I upset you when I did this. Or I think I hurt you when I did this. Please forgive me.
I think it's also nice to just pray about it as well, because, you know, when you do that, then God really does call out to you, and He places on your spirit.
Yes.
You know exactly who to actually approach.
Yeah.
Because there's some things that you unknowingly do.
Yeah.
You might not even be aware that you're doing someone.
Yeah.
And I mean, the first time I did this, I didn't even know about it. I don't even know what the season was at that time. But God had just pressed in my heart to say sorry to someone. And I actually was shocked, because I thought that person needed to say sorry to me. I was the one that actually was offending them.
Yeah, this is the problem.
And I was like, are you serious right now? And we didn't stay close or anything, so I just sent a Facebook message. And it was tough. And I just sent it because I'd just gone to church and I just did a home cell evening, and God pressed it on my heart. And I just sent the message on my prayer, it's done, and I went to bed at like 10 o'clock or whatever. Then I saw the next morning the person replied and actually said, you know what? I really appreciate your message, and I actually think I'm going to look in my own backyard.
Yeah, it's
I'm going to actually see
what they need to do.
actually say sorry to.
It's a nice way.
If I've done anything to offend you as well, I'm so sorry. So, like, you know, I also got the sorry that I felt I needed from that person.
Yeah, but that doesn't always happen. Yeah.
Strong person and start.
Look, guys, you will know if you've never asked for forgiveness for something. You will know, okay, there was that one time where I did something really stupid to this one person. Maybe I should go and ask for forgiveness. And it could be 10 years ago. But it's an important step in our walk. If we can get forgiveness for that, or even if we just ask for forgiveness for that, and they don't want to forgive us, so what? You've gone to them. You've asked for forgiveness. The unforgiveness is in their heart. And that's with them. So just take the time now, over the next few weeks, and just start thinking about that. Because it is an important step in our walk with man, with one another.
I was going to add, the reason it's so important is because it's not just keeping you from God, but it's also keeping that person from God. So if you can release that themselves, forgive, even if you're not able to get hold of the person that you know is virtually God's revealed it to you, yes, it does release you in the spirit, but it also releases them in the spirit, and that God can deal with them. Because if you hang on to those things, you actually are standing
Well, yeah. Look, it's more for you to come right with your fellow man, so that when you go to God, you can say, you know what, I've done a bunch of stupid things, but I've tried to make right with them. I have tried, and that is your responsibility. If you've done wrong, it is your responsibility to make right. The Word tells us that. Make right, make restitution. If you've stolen from someone, you give them back 1/5. What you stole plus 1/5, there's a basic sort of outline. But if you've taken time from that person, if you've taken patience or whatever, if you've really upset them, or if you've done something terrible to someone, now's the time to go to them. And it's hard, guys. It's hard because you need to face up to the fact that you did something wrong. I had to sit with some people and I had to say, I'm really sorry for this, for this, for this. And it's then that person can actually have rest from what you did, because you've never gone and asked, you've never apologized. Okay? All right. Prayer time's happy time.